The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today for our webinar, Engaging Parent Leaders in Evaluation, Benefits, Challenges, and Lessons Learned. This is the first of 3 webinars that the Funders Group on Parent Organizing, Family Engagement, and Leadership Development has planned for 2019. My name is Iris Alent, a consultant for the Funders Group, and I will be the moderator for today. Before we begin, I would like to note that everybody is in listen-only mode during this presentation portion of the webinar. However, when we transition to the Q&A discussion, you may raise your hand and you will be unmuted to share your question or to respond to questions. We do strongly encourage discussion throughout today's webinar. There is a chat box where you can enter any questions you may have throughout the presentation portion of today. And if you have any technical issues, you can message those in the chat box. Finally, I would like to note that today's webinar is being recorded and will be sent to everyone who registered. And at the end of the webinar, you will be invited to respond to a brief survey about today's discussions. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Irene Lee, one of the co-chairs of the Funders Group Advisory Committee, to introduce our speakers and share some opening remarks. Irene?
Thank you, Iris. Before I introduce our speakers, I wanted to highlight that today's webinar is in direct response to interest from members of our Funders Group. You see a description on the slide in front of you, and also interest from other affinity groups, some of whom are also on this call. I will say I'm excited about today's topic because I think it really represents an idea worth spreading, putting equity in evaluation. You'll hear how parent leaders of different cultures and geographies became co-equal producers with an academic institution, resulting in a shared theory of change, metrics, and evaluation measures. And they're going to be honest about what worked and what it took. We feel the Parent Leadership and Indicators Project and the Parent Leadership Evaluation Network is a good example of aligned funding by members of the Funders Group, in this case Kellogg, Peppercorn, Hagedorn, and the Annie Casey Foundation, where I sit. I also want to acknowledge the vision, leadership, and perseverance of Jennifer Odell from Kellogg, Ada Sanchez from Peppercorn, and Linda Parmalee from Hagedorn, without whom this Funders Group and this project would not have happened. Both Ada and Linda are now leading a new effort, the Parent Organizing Technical Assistance Project. They're terrific mentors and resources for funders and parent groups alike. I know because I've benefited greatly from their generous guidance and innovative thinking. So let's turn to slide 3. Let me introduce you to our 3 speakers for today. Joanna Geller, pictured on the left, is with the Metropolitan Center for Research and Equity and the Transformation of Schools at New York University. She not only is the principal investigator of the Parent Leadership Indicators Project, but she's often described how partnering with parents on this evaluation project really was transformative. Pictured in the middle is Luva Alvarez, who's a proud parent, community organizer, and advocate for change and works with the Rochester, New York Parent Leadership Institute. And Jennifer Gadu, pictured on the right, describes herself as an advocate for productive friction. She's also a parent and works with the National Parent Leadership Institute. So let me now turn it over to our 3 speakers.
Thank you so much, Irene, for that warm welcome and for inviting us to present on this webinar today. This is Joanna Geller from NYU Metro Center speaking. So I'm going to kick things off and then I'll hand it over to Jennifer and Luva. Before I do that, I just also want to certainly echo your gratitude toward Ada Sanchez and Linda Parmalee for championing this work. And many thanks to all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for this hour. We're really looking forward to it. So today's goals are for you to learn how parent leadership organizations led their own evaluations from start to finish with support from an organization called Dialogues in Action, as well as our team at NYU. We're going to highlight the impact of the participatory evaluation process on parent leaders, staff, and organizations. And I think most importantly, we'll discuss challenges and recommendations for future participatory evaluation or research projects. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start off just with a brief overview of the Parent Leadership Indicators Project. And you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of background on why participatory evaluation is important, given that I think probably everyone who's participating in this webinar today has a shared goal for research and evaluation to advance equity. So for me, my realization that traditional research wasn't sufficient came when I was a graduate student in Nashville, and I was conducting focus groups with mothers who lived in the poorest public housing development in the city on behalf of a community-based organization that was applying for a federal Promise Neighborhoods grant. And the focus group I was conducting soon became really emotional as the mothers discussed their daily fears that her children would become victims of gun violence. And I'll never forget one mother saying that her child had to learn how to get down to protect himself from bullets before learning his ABCs. So I left the focus group that day with the sinking feeling that we had missed an opportunity to do something much more powerful. And when the Promise Neighborhood was ultimately funded, unfortunately, little of what the mothers discussed in those focus groups was addressed. And I look back now on that experience and think, what if instead of me asking all of the questions that day and then writing the findings up in a report, what if the mothers and I had designed the questions together? What if the mothers had interviewed other parents in their community and we'd all analyzed the data together? What if based on the data we had created an action plan and the mothers had supported the implementation of the Promise Neighborhood when it was eventually funded and held it accountable to actually addressing the community's needs and build upon its strengths? So I think the challenges that I described and also the promise of research to be different are summed up really nicely in this graphic that Irene actually shared with me. And it comes from a group called Chicago Beyond called Why Am I Always Being Researched? And it describes how funders and researchers can disrupt the power inequities that research often perpetuates in communities of color. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at these guiding questions if you haven't already. And next slide, please. So the Parent Leadership Indicators Project seeks to disrupt these inequities that are too often perpetuated by research and evaluation. Our team at NYU considers ourselves researchers and evaluators who are working collaboratively with parent leaders, staff, funders, and other scholars to develop novel, engaging, participatory, and culturally responsive ways to evaluate parent leadership development initiatives. And to this end, we have three pillars of our work. First, we co-create evaluation tools with parent leaders. Second, we build the capacity of parent leadership initiatives to engage in evaluation. And third, we seek to disseminate knowledge that advances the field of parent leadership. Next slide, please. And our research and evaluation work is guided by the ripple effect theory of change, which was also developed in collaboration with parent leaders, staff, funders, and other scholars. So unlike evaluation where outsiders define which outcomes matter and which don't, we designed this theory of change together. And I will say that the theory of change is a constant work in progress. And so as an example, just a few months ago, we went through another collaborative process to improve the fourth ripple of the theory of change, which is parents become valued advisors to public officials, because we were receiving feedback that the way it was previously written was no longer resonating. So 2 years after the initial ripple effect was changed, we're still decided to revise it, and we continue to revise it now. Next slide, please. So our values for this work are first that evaluation must use a racial justice lens, that stories from parents matter, that participatory evaluation is rigorous evaluation, that the purpose of evaluation is not just to prove, but also to improve, and that systemic change takes time and can't be measured overnight. And again, these values have been deeply informed by the broader field and what they see as socially just and humanizing evaluation work. Next slide. So for the sake of time, I won't go through this list of accomplishments of the Parent Leadership Indicators Project, but I do definitely encourage you to check out the folder with supplemental resources, which will be shared with you, where you can find all of these various publications, with the exception of the full publication of what 7 parent leadership initiatives learned from evaluation, which should be available in the next few days. So we'll make sure that that gets out when it becomes available. Next slide. So we formed the Parent Leadership Evaluation Network in 2017 as a way to operationalize the 3 pillars of our work. There are 7 parent leadership initiatives that are represented in this pilot network. And each plan organization chose 3 to 5 people to be part of their evaluation teams. And the one stipulation was that each team needed to have at least 1 parent leader and at least 1 senior staff member of the organization in order to sustain the evaluation work over time. The organizations receive training by Dialogues in Action, which also goes by Project Impact, in qualitative evaluation methods. And as another example of how our work is field-driven, we chose to work with Dialogues in Action because of a recommendation from 2 of our advisory board members, Linda Parmalee and Danielle Asher, who had worked with them on Long Island. Next slide, please. So the 7 CLEN organizations include the Washington State Association of Head Start and ECAP Parent Ambassadors Program in Washington State, Parent Voices in California, OLE in New Mexico, ARISE in Southwest Texas, COFI, or Community Organizing for Family Issues in Illinois, Parents for Public Schools in Mississippi, and they also engaged their chapter in North Carolina, and certainly last but not least, the Greater Rochester Parent Leadership Training Institute. And I do want to mention that 5 of these organizations are also members of UPLAN, the United Parent Leader Action Network, and UPLAN has been an incredibly important collaborator in this work. Next slide, please. So Project Impact has a 3-step process, and I won't go over it in depth right now because I know Jennifer and Luva will walk you through it and make it come alive. So I'm just going to make one point here. The goal of this process is for organizations to be able to engage in critical reflection about what they think they do, what they actually do, and how they can do it better. So that the theory is evaluation is more likely to lead organizations to improvement when the people who are closest to the organization have ownership over the findings. And the idea is that the organizations best know what's possible in their context and are better positioned than external evaluators to create realistic recommendations and follow through on them. Next slide, please. The Project Impact process only focused on qualitative evaluation because we are also working collaboratively with the PLEN organizations to improve the parent leader outcome pre-post survey, which was originally developed with the National Parent Leadership Institute. And we won't discuss that too much during this actual presentation, but we can certainly talk about it in the Q&A. So the main methods that were used in the Project Impact work were interviews. And the PLEN organizations altogether conducted 169 interviews with parent leaders. And as you can see from the slide, the majority of those parent leaders were either Black or Latinx. And then there were 49 interviewers across the 7 organizations. And you can see that a quarter of those interviewers were parent leaders. And then with the next slide, I will turn it over to my colleagues, Jennifer and Luva.
Hi, happy Wednesday. My name is Luva Alvarez. I am a parent alum and a parent leader of the Greater Rochester PLTI of Cohort 1. I am now transitioned into leadership role as a site and alumni coordinator with the Greater Rochester PLTI. As a site coordinator, I'm happy to coordinate and form a cohort of parent leaders that learn about civic and public engagement. And as well, when they leave the program, they're able to become better parent leaders and better parent advocates for their children in the community.
And my name is Jennifer Gaddu, and I just wanted to speak briefly about the National Parent Leadership Institute. Our local Parent Leadership Training Institutes, or PLTIs, work with parents so that they can improve lifelong health, safety, and learning of children and become practice change agents for the next generation. We use a 20-week cohort model. It's intentionally diverse, and we use expert facilitators. I graduated from the 2017 cohort of the Greater Rochester PLTI, stayed active as an alum and engaged through our Plen work and other projects, and I just transitioned to the national team about a month ago. And we're very happy to be with you here today. Next slide, please.
So the training that we attended was a 2-day in-person training in Denver, Colorado. It occurred in March of 2018. As Joanna had mentioned, we had 5 of our colleagues that attended with us. We attended this program and went to work with the Dialogues in Action, which as well goes by Project Impact. We learned about evaluation theory and the heart triangle method. We also selected existing indicators and created new ones and designed interview protocols.
One of the things that we thought about a lot as we were building this work was how to protect against bias. We wanted to make sure that we assembled both a team and a group of interviewees that would give us really good critical insight so that we could think a lot about improvements that we wanted to make as an organization.
Next slide, please.
The heart triangle method was provided as a framework by Dialogues in Action, and it was very helpful for us to understand how to explore transformation, how we could think about understanding more deeply how change happens for people and as they go deeper into the heart. The structure of this framework helped us to shape our questions as we were approaching the interviews, and also helped us to think really carefully about the responses we got so that we could surface how interviewees were impacted by their PLTI experiences. Next slide, please. So Carolyn Lee Davis, who was she was a key member of our team and our senior staff member with NPLI. She had strong ties to our alumni and to the team members. She was instrumental in building our interviewee group, as well as to helping to build our team. We had a focus on building a diverse list of interviewees, and also our core team. We wanted to have diversity represented on that team as well. Our interviewees span all of our graduated cohorts, as well as an array of demographics. Each team member interviewed 2 to 4 alumni, and we recorded those interviews in a variety of methods, taking notes, recording and transcribing. And we tried to focus really on careful listening and creating a dialogue. And altogether, we interviewed 23 alumni. Next slide, please.
So in the 2 days that we were there in person in Denver, we learned how to map out themes, discuss how to respond to findings, and how to communicate about the findings. We also continued the analysis process with the rest of our team back in Rochester, New York, alumni and other leaders that were able to help and that we invited to review the findings. Then the 2 team members took the lead in writing the report. And that would have been Carolyn Lee Davis and Jen Jadot. Next slide, please.
So you can see our core team here, and we definitely built stronger relationships with each other. Luva and I now collaborate quite a bit, but we didn't even know each other before we went to Denver. We also connected with alumni through the interview process. So we built stronger ties across our alumni group. And we got very close to the data and the findings So we were invested in what we learned. We really felt we could celebrate the positive outcomes, and we also wanted to be part of any improvement efforts that we built based on what we found through this work. We built our tools for inquiry and evaluation, and we had opportunities to grow our support of our alumni. We saw that our work and our efforts were very successful in reaching many of our goals, such as helping parent leaders better understand racial equity issues. But we also heard from them that they wanted continuing opportunities to learn and engage, which led NPLI to engage in a pilot effort to support alumni around racial equity work. We also engaged with Joanna's team during this effort to build a pre and post survey for PLTI that we utilize across our 55 sites, allowing us to collect and analyze parent leader growth each year. Next slide, please.
So some of the challenges that we saw during this process that we realized as a team that it was time consuming. As you can see, it took about 190 hours to complete. And although we like to be around each other and we learn from each other and we got better at being around each other, it was very time consuming. Also, the travel to in-person convenience was difficult for some, given with work schedules, childcare responsibilities, etc. Next slide, please. The recommendations. What we found as a team when we sat and we talked and we discussed, it was that that we recommended that there are resources such as childcare and transportation and stipends should be available for parents when we're doing this process. We also said that parents should care about the initiative or issues they're researching or evaluating up front. So the buy-in really matters. And we also recommended that having a trusted person in the community who can help recruit, research, the evaluation participants is also helpful. We had that with Carolyn Lee Davis.
Next slide. We're going to hand it back to Joanna.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer and Luva. So I just want to wrap up this part by pointing out that we conducted interviews with the PLEN members after the process to learn about the impact of the process on them as people and on their organizations, and also to learn about how it could be better. And one sort of neat finding was that we found the outcomes of participatory evaluation aligned really well with what we discovered through the evaluations themselves to be the 5 qualities of effective parent leadership initiatives. So these 5 qualities of effective parent leadership initiatives are that they're humanizing, familial, unifying, empowering, and responsible. Participatory evaluation was humanizing in that it was dignifying and emphasized true listening. It was familial because, as Jennifer said, we heard over and over again that it built stronger relationships among the evaluation team and between interviewers and interviewees. It was unifying in that it helped the evaluation teams at times break down their assumptions about others. It was empowering in that it strengthened evaluation teams' active listening skills and critical inquiry skills. And it was responsible in that it catalyzed organizations to reflect on how to better support parent leaders. So in short, participatory evaluation was a really natural fit for the approaches and values that parent leaderships already had and served to further deepen their work. So this doesn't take away from the point that it was extremely time consuming and that organizations should certainly be resourced appropriately to do this kind of work, but we did also find that it fits well with what they already do. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to share this quote that really struck me from one of our PLEN members. She said, "Part of my concern always around evaluation is that we are not exploiting our parents' story or telling their story in a way that doesn't respect them and the wonderful people they are. I have less fear about that in this process than in any other process we've done. This feels respectful and supportive, and it doesn't feel like we're exploiting their story so that people will fund us." Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm sure there's a lot of questions at this point, and we're really anxious to hear all of them. So I just have one more content slide for all of you on our hopeful next steps. And you can advance to the next slide, please. So when you work with so many brilliant and passionate people, there's no shortage of ideas that emerge for how the work can continue and grow. Our generous Kellogg funding ends in October, and so we have a lot of ideas. First of all, as next steps, we would like to co-create new evaluation tools, including a parent leader app where we'd be able to collect data on the long-term impact of parent leadership initiatives on parents and their children. So this app would make it possible for parents to log their accomplishments over time, such as being elected to office, which we know is happening all of the time, or going back to school or advancing their career, as well as being able to log the accomplishments of their children, such as if their children graduate from college or get a job of their own. And this app would also give parent leaders an opportunity to network across the country with each other in a virtual space. We'd also like to pilot new evaluation tools for capturing the outer ripples of the theory of change, including changes in systems, practices, and policies. So we focused most of our energy so far on understanding what a high-quality parent leadership initiative looks like, and understanding its impact on parents' human development, because we found that that's so foundational to understanding how systemic change happens. But now that we've completed that phase of the work, we really want to turn our attention outwards to document the changes that these initiatives lead to in communities and states and even at the federal level. In terms of capacity building, we would like to develop a peer learning community of parent leadership organizations doing continuous improvement to strengthen their racial equity work. This idea actually came to us from Ada and Linda with the Parent Organizing Technical Assistance Project, and is a natural outgrowth of the findings of the PLEN organizations that advancing racial equity is really a priority for them. And as Jennifer talked about, they're already taking steps to deepen this work at a national level, and we certainly want to support that effort. In terms of the point about needing to better resource parent leaders to engage in evaluation, we'd also like to develop a paid parent leaders evaluation fellowship program for parent leaders who wish to lead evaluation efforts within their own organizations. And finally, we hope to continue to build the field of parent leadership through an annual synthesis of both the quantitative and the qualitative data that we collect to continue to build the case for why parent leadership is so critical, and also to illustrate how the fields can continue to advance and improve their work. And we also hope to do empirical research, for example, on the intergenerational impact of parent leadership organizations, which is one of the key findings that emerged from these 7 evaluations, as well as the experiences of parents who become elected officials and how they, as elected officials who are also parent leaders, impact their communities. So as I promised, there's no shortage of ideas that we have for how this work could grow in the future. And next slide. We certainly encourage you to check out the website of the Parent Leadership Indicators Project, where you can find some of the resources that were mentioned and view the whole indicator framework. We also hope that you check out the website of the Greater Rochester PLTI and their umbrella organization, the National Parent Leadership Institute, as well as Dialogues in Action, which of course conducted the training and the coaching for this participatory evaluation project. And we'll go ahead to the next slide.
Great. Thank you very much, Jennifer, Joanna, and Luva, for sharing this really exciting and empowering work, and for highlighting a lot of the different ways that you can authentically engage with parent leaders and elevate parent voice and really build strong partnerships through evaluation. I'm sure that this is bringing up a lot of interesting thoughts as well as questions as this relates to internal and external grant-making practices for those that are on the line. So now we would love to transition to our open discussion. I do know that we do have Allison Holmes, a Senior Research Associate at the Annie E. Casey Foundation, on the line. And Allison, one question that is surfacing for me is how has this project, if at all, influenced how the Annie E. Casey Foundation thinks about engaging community members, such as parents or even youth in evaluation? Or how has this project informed the foundation's evaluation practices?
Yes, thank you. I think this project is a nice example of how Casey is explicitly and intentionally embedding an equitable evaluation frame in our work, and community engagement and participatory research approaches are a part of a larger evaluation frame like this to identify racial and ethnic disparities as well as drivers of inequities. And taking this approach really requires doing our work differently. So for instance, we have to, at a conceptual level, share power and expertise with stakeholders, which is not typically how we approach kind of traditional evaluation. And at a structural or design level, we have to allow sufficient time for the work to occur. So that means allowing more time in grants to allow stakeholders to come together and allow some of that co-creation that we saw examples of today to come together. I think the descriptions we heard today also echo other experiences we've had in that community engagement, and that it's time and resource intensive, but incredibly rich and valuable. And in doing our work differently, it's an opportunity for innovation, both in methods and meaning making that we can have. I'd also just like to highlight that taking these approaches, it's not a trade-off for scientific rigor, but it's rather how we can use science in a respectful way to build solid evidence that is personally and culturally meaningful. And ultimately, this will strengthen the field and help us address social inequities more largely.
Great, thank you, Allison. Those are really, really great points. Now I would like to take some time to address any questions that have come up in the chat box. One question that has come up was relationships and partnerships are so important. Could you talk more about how you built stronger relationships among evaluation team and between interviewers and interviewees?
This is Joanna. So maybe I can take the question about the relationships between the interviewing teams, and then Jennifer and Luba can take the question about the relationships between interviewers and interviewees. So I can start. So I guess I should mention that this project has a long history that far predates my work on it. And so I know that the goal of creating a theory of change for parent leadership came in 2014 with the vision of Elaine Zimmerman, who is then the director of the National Parent Leadership Institute, as well as Ada Sanchez and Linda Parmalee. And they had been working with parent leadership organizations for decades on this work. And so a lot of those relationships did already exist. And we really were able to kind of build on those existing relationships, particularly as UPlan was developing. So we attended several UPlan meetings that were held at national conferences and that were held in other spaces nationally, to really just start getting ideas about how parent leaders and parent leadership staff felt about evaluation and what outcomes they really felt were important and how they believed that they could get to those outcomes. So you know, we're really grateful that many of those relationships already existed. And when we brought a couple of new organizations into the process that weren't already part of UPlan, there was just already this sort of warmth and familiarity and trust that was in the room as soon as we got to Denver. So with the very first icebreaker that we did, you know, people were talking and laughing and hugging and like they were old friends, I would say. So we're really grateful for all of the work that was done before us to develop this sort of camaraderie between the organizations. And I think that the spirit of evaluation that was part of these trainings really encourage vulnerability. And I was really impressed with how the organizations talked about their accomplishments and impacts together, but also were really honest and really vulnerable about how they could be better. And because they had that trust and because they could be so honest and vulnerable, that's why we see this work, especially around racial equity, moving forward now. And I'll turn it over to Jennifer and Luva for the second part of the question.
This is Jennifer. I want to echo some of the points that Joanna made that I think speak to a general culture in approaching this work. Our experience with PLTI has been really heart-driven work, and the work that we did with the Dialogues and Action team and the PLEN team around the Heart Triangle really set the tone for us as we were approaching the interviews. It really gave us an opportunity to go in with a real intention of connection. And it also, the process of the interviews naturally surfaced things that we were experiencing similar to those that the interviewees were experiencing as alumni. And so it really did help to sort of forge this like cathartic connection as we were doing the interviews that just really happened naturally. And also as like an extension of the existing culture of our organization and the framing that we came in with as we were approaching the interviews.
Yeah, so this is Luba. So I would definitely echo what Jen just said. When we left the training, we came back home and we started to conduct the interviews. Because we've gotten that training with the HEART method and we learned how to connect and how to do it, it seemed very easy to sit down with our alum and discuss and talk and ask questions. And it didn't come from a place of like, I would say rigidness. It just came from a place of just the questions just flowed and it came natural from us. And so as a result, we was able to build those relationships more tighter than what it was from the different alum across the cohorts.
And we definitely, I think this was from the Dialogues in Action, and our team really committed to this. Mm-hmm. We did our interviews face to face.
Yes.
And that I think was a really important, like it may seem like a small thing, but I think it was really important in building those relationships.
Yeah. Mm. Great, thank you so much. So now I'd like to open the floor for other questions or thoughts from participants. If you would like to share your question in the question box, or if you would like to speak to help us with audio and background noise, if you would like to either ask a question or respond to a question, please raise your hand on the platform box, and then you will be unmuted and able to share. Are there any other questions for the presenters? Or comments or thoughts?
This is Allison Gray. I have a question. One of the challenges that was mentioned was about getting parents to in-person meetings and the issues around schedules and childcare and travel. And I'm just curious to know, I mean, I know it was on your list of recommendations about offering stipends for travel, for example, but I'm just wondering how you handled those challenges during the project period.
Can we?
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, well, we wanted to clarify that as we were talking about recommendations, this particular project did allow for a lot of support of parents in terms of travel, et cetera. But one of the things that we wanted to emphasize in the recommendations is that there were certain aspects of this project that we were able to take advantage of because of certain privileges, like childcare being number one. The travel to Denver was instrumental in the work we did, and it also gave us some bonding time too. Like Luva and I went shopping together when we were in Denver. But you know, it was a consideration to make sure that we had childcare for our children while we were doing that work. And we did, and that wasn't a hindrance for us. But moving forward, in order to offer this as an opportunity for all parents, that would be a major consideration. But I'll let Joanna speak a little bit more about the particulars of the project.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jennifer, for pointing that out. I think if we were to do this again, certainly having childcare would be great. So we paid for all of the travel, and then we gave organizations a stipend of $1,500, which we encouraged them to use to support the participation of parent leaders in this process. Again, if we were to do this process another time, we would certainly budget to up that stipend a lot, given the amount of time that it took parent leaders, but also the tremendous value of having them there in person. And I think if we were to do this again, we'd also think about how we could engage more parent leaders who are not able to travel. So there was a virtual training that was held for any parent leaders who wanted to be involved who couldn't travel after the training in Denver, but it was like 1 hour during the day. So I think we would think a little bit more about how we might be able to do some supplementary training virtually. And the other thing I would say about access is we had simultaneous translators in Denver translating from English to Spanish, which was great, but we did not have that in the virtual trainings. And so we had to rely on just members of our team who are bilingual to do that work. And so I think in the future, we really want to be intentional about making sure that we have funding so that everybody has access to the trainings, no matter what language they speak and no matter whether they can travel or not travel.
Great, thank you. I think that actually addressed one of the other questions that had come up about whether language is a barrier and if a translation was provided. I'm curious if there are other questions or comments or thoughts that others would like to elevate. Feel free to raise your hand and you'll be unmuted, or type in the chat box. I'm not sure if Joanna, Jennifer, or Luva wanted to highlight anything about the pre and post survey, if there was anything that was important to highlight there as well. Oh, actually, I have another question. What kind of strategies do you use to help keep parents engaged?
Is that a question for the research team or for the PLTI team?
Both.
Luva, do you want to speak to the alumni engagement work?
So yes, at the Greater Rochester PLTI, we have joined in with NPLI's suggestion of having the alumni pilot year. And it has been going really great here in Rochester, where we have created opportunities for our parents, alum, to have program development, give out resources, have events that they are looking to help with their projects that's after the PLTI experience, or just learning more information. One of them I could give you an example of is that in May, we recently had a event on grant writing. And that was a very successful event for our parents, because they were those who were trying to get some more information on how to write a grant or how to get the resources they need in the community to get their project going. We were able to bring in 2 people in the community who are expertise in grant writing and giving information for that conversation. And that was very helpful as well. Another one we focused on was race and equity. We did a whole event on that too as well. Parents got to come in and talk about race and equity in their school districts and how that affects their child. So every month or every week, we're trying to engage our parents in conversation. We listen to them after our post surveys that we do, what they want to see differently or what they would like to have or, be to come to Rochester. So that's how we try to keep them engaged. And we also, do it through social media, email connection, and also just talking face to face.
And this is Joanna. I can elaborate on how we've tried to sustain the engagement of the Plan organizations over time. So we are very, very grateful for video conferencing. We've done a number of virtual meetings that almost feel a little bit like face-to-face meetings because we can all see each other. So as I mentioned, after the process was finally completed and the organizations had turned in drafts of their reports, we did a series of 6 virtual focus groups where we interviewed the Plan members about their experiences. And we found that it worked well just to set 6 different times at different times during the day, in the evening, so that people could join when they could. And I think what made these focus groups really productive was that people were able to join from different organizations around the country, and so that they could build off one another's comments and feedback and have another opportunity to kind of network with each other and learn from each other. We also just a few weeks ago in Reno presented together at the IEL Family and Community Engagement Conference. So we did a workshop on this process, and we had 3 of the Plan organizations represented at that workshop. And any day now, the book that was created, co-written by all the Plan organizations and our team will be coming out. And so we plan to have another virtual meeting really soon to create a communications and dissemination strategy. And we're thinking about having a virtual book launch for that. So, we found that it's hard because all of these organizations are so busy. They're doing direct service work, they're organizing, they're constantly engaged in campaigns, but we found that there really is like passion and energy around this evaluation work. So I think if we make it convenient enough for people to be able to have a voice in this work and sustain the work, the energy and the passion is there. So that's been really great to see.
Great, thank you. Another question that has come through is, are there next steps related to the Parent Leader app that was mentioned?
Right now, there are not next steps. We've kind of floated this idea out there in a number of spaces and have gotten really good feedback about the idea, mainly because I think it's a really common problem among parent leadership initiatives that they know all of these fantastic things are happening, but they just don't have a way to track them over the long term. The pre-post survey, I think, does a really good job of showing dramatic changes in parent civic engagement and personal outcomes over the span of, like a 6 months or 1 year initiative. But we also know that there are a lot of outcomes that happen much later that are powerful. And so there definitely seems to be a collective will to create this app. What I would vision as the first step, if we were to receive funding to move forward on this, would be to gather parent leaders and staff and funders and probably some scholars and tech people throughout the country to figure out what should be part of the app. And then I think most importantly, what would make parent leaders actually use it? What would make them want to go in there and log their accomplishments?
Great, thank you. Are there other questions or comments or thoughts that others would like to share? Again, please raise your hand so you can be unmuted. Otherwise, you can also chat in the chat box. Okay, I don't see that there are any other questions coming through. I'll wait just a moment and see if there's any other comments or thoughts that come through on the audio line. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. Irene, I'm not sure if there's any final thoughts, or Joanna, Jennifer, Luva, if you want to make any final remarks before we close.
This
No,
is
this is
Jennifer.
Irene. Oh, go ahead, Jennifer.
We just wanted to say that we really enjoyed having the opportunity to talk about this
Yeah.
work. And being able to engage in this project, I think, had a significant impact on us as an organization and individuals. And so we're just really grateful to be able to share that today.
Thank you. On behalf of the funders group, both who are on the call and, as our kind of kickoff webinar, I just want to emphasize that we're committed to, to continue to be on a journey with you all in this space, because I think as funders, we're just trying to kind of understand our own continuum and baby steps, both in learning and action on parent and family engagement, and this notion of co-producers and co-creators. What's the value add from your all perspective versus what an institution might say we're trying to get out of the transaction, moving it from transaction to transformation. So Iris, I believe what we're going to do is make the full deck available and maybe some links to some other materials so that folks can either share that with other colleagues who couldn't be on the call today, or just continue to dig deeper as they're thinking through, what else they'd like to learn on this.
Yep. Yes, next slide, please. And next slide. Yes. Okay. So a final reminder, yes, as Irene mentioned, that you will receive a recording of today's webinar. So that will come through in addition to additional resources on the Parent Leadership Indicators project that you heard about today. And then we'll also be sharing some additional details for the next event in our discussion and learning series. That is going to be held on August 22nd, so save the date. And then if you could also please complete the survey following this session with some of your feedback, we'd really value your input. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to spend with us and engage in this really fruitful conversation about engaging parents in evaluation efforts. And thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of your week.